we went to Philo of Alexandria, Egypt. From Philo, we went to Clement. Pantatus was before him, but Clement is the noteworthy one because we studied out that Clement tried to marry philosophy, the Greek philosophers, and their thoughts and such as that with Christianity. And you may not realize it, but when you get into those texts and everything else, you'll see how that their philosophies affected their translation of the Bible. And then from Clement, we went to Origen. And from Origen, Adamantus Origen, we went to Eusebius. And Eusebius and Pamphilus are the ones who make the copy of the 50 copies requested by Constantine the Great. And we find that they get it from Origen's Hexapla, the 5th column. According to Eusebius' own testimony, that's where he got it. But we're studying the philosophy and how philosophy affected the church. But notice we're talking about the Roman church. Because these are we see that these are the men that affect the theologians. And even though we're stepping ahead in time to 1200, this is Thomas Aquinas. He's referred to as the theologian of the Roman Catholic Church. St. Thomas Aquinas, 1225 to 1274, was what? You understand? Let me tell you something. In the Bible-believing church, they were not referred to as philosophers. They were bishops of the church. And even their writings refer to them as the bishops. By the time 1225, the philosophers have now taken on a new title. During the days by the days of Charlemagne, 600 AD, you find out this right here, that all of a sudden scholasticism now comes in, and the theologians of the scholastic tradition are now being called what?
Doctors.
Who's taking over the churches today? The doctors are. You get a doctor's degree in theology. That automatic, listen, the qualifications of a bishop now are not 1 Timothy chapter 3 and Titus chapter 1. Now, it's till you have a degree from a school.
Right.
He's the foremost classical proponent of natural theology and the father of the Thomistic school of philosophy, which was long the primary philosophical approach of the Roman Catholic Church. One of the 33 doctors of the church, he's considered by many Catholics to be the church's greatest theologian. Consequently, many institutions of learning have been named after him. Notice what he's got in his hand, y'all. Do you see what he's got in his hand? Look at this. No. That ain't the Bible. He viewed theology or the sacred doctrine as a science whose raw material data consists of written scripture and the tradition of the church. The thing about Thomas Aquinas is, Thomas Aquinas got his doctrines from Aristotle. The thing about Aristotle that was different from Plato and Socrates was that Aristotle believed in an authoritarian ruling of an upper class. That's why the Roman Church adopted him to be their theologian, because he believed that everybody ought to be submissive to one head of the church. Therefore, he exalted the position of the Pope as the bishop of all bishops over the church. Faith and reason, notice, faith and reason, while distinct but related, are the two primary tools for processing the data of theology. Aquinas believed that both were necessary, or rather, that the influence of both was necessary. Notice, influence of both was necessary for one to obtain true knowledge of God. You got to have them both. Early study of Aristotle, there he is, left a deep impression on him. His theology bears the distinct marks of Aristotelianism. Aquinas blended what? and Christian doctrine by suggesting that rational thinking and the study of nature, science, like revelation, were valid ways to understand God. According to Aquinas, God reveals Himself through what?
Nature.
There we go. Thank you, Aristotle. Aquinas viewed theology or the sacred doctrine as a science, one whose raw material data consists of written Scripture and the tradition of the church. Therefore, at the Council of Trent, tradition is just as authoritative as the Scriptures. In fact, you know what they did? They took St. Thomas Aquinas' books and laid them side by side with the Bible. Aquinas blended Greek philosophy and Christian doctrine by suggesting that rational thinking and the study of nature, like revelation, were valid ways to understand God. According to Aquinas, God reveals Himself through nature, so to study nature is to study God. How about that one? The ultimate goal of theology in Aquinas' mind are to use reason to grasp the truth about God and experience salvation through that truth. The philosophy of Aquinas has exerted enormous influence on the subsequent Christian theology, especially that of who? Really? Maybe that's why they're so different. And maybe that's why they can embrace all the paganistic practices and rituals of paganism and marry them to Christianity. You know what I'm talking about? Here comes Peter Cottontail hopping down the bunny trail. Hippity hoppity, Easter's on its way. Extending to Western philosophy in general, where he stands as a vehicle and a modifier of what? Why didn't it say Christendom? Why didn't it say Christianity there, y'all? He's a vehicle and a modifier of Aristotelianism. Philosophically, his most important enduring work is the Summa Theologiae, which he expounds his systematic theology. Aquinas was also an Aristotelian and an empiricist. There it is. You know what that is? He believed a man, one man, ought to run the Christian empire. Guess who that one man was? That's it. He has substantially influenced these two streams of Western thought. Leo the 13th. Wow, what a number. And isn't Leo a lion?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Your adversary is a roaring lion.
Right.
Decreed that all Catholics, as far as the seminaries are concerned, and universities, must teach Aquinas' doctrines. And where Aquinas did not speak on a topic, look at this. Where he didn't speak on a topic, the teachers were urged to teach conclusions that were reconcilable with his thinking. Look at this. Aquinas also greatly influenced Roman Catholic understandings of mortal and venial sins. He showed you how that one was different than the other. Isn't that nice? Shame he didn't get it from the Bible. So what we have now is philosophy influencing the Word of God. Do you see that? If you can't see that, you make sure you get these tapes until you do see that. Because the Bible believers weren't philosophers. I'm not saying Bible believers never read philosophy, but they definitely made sure the one thing, they never exalted the philosophers above the Scriptures. We're looking at the tree known by its fruit. Vaticanus. Codex Vaticanus, so called because of its most famous manuscript in the possession of where?
Vatican.
There we go. That's where we need to go to get our Bibles.
You betcha.
It is generally believed to be from the 4th century and is thought to be the oldest, nearly. I'm glad they said nearly. A complete copy of the Greek Bible in existence. Lacking from it are most of the book of Genesis, Hebrews 9:14 to the end, the pastoral epistles, and the book of Revelation. Well, that would be something, wouldn't it? Most of the book of Genesis, because they don't believe that in the first place. Thomas Aquinas and all the rest of them, as far as, Origen, Adamantus. You know what Adamantus Origen said? That no reasonable person could possibly believe that Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3 is history. All of that, he said, was allegorical. So you know what they do? They ain't no Genesis. It's chopped all up, and as far as most of that book, it's missing. Wonder why Hebrews 9:14 to the end of Hebrews would be missing.
The blood, faith.
Because it identifies a priesthood. Look at this. The pastoral epistles. Wonder why those would be missing. And then look at this. Wow. I wonder why that one's gone.
Instruction of the church.
Because that one identifies the devil's church. These parts were lost by damage to the front and back of the volume. Fine. What about the middle? Which is common in ancient manuscripts. Stacked in a library. The writing is in capital letters. What does that tell us, folks? Called uncial script.
Wasn't for the common man.
Then it's the theologians, you understand? It is the philosophers who write in this book. Without spaces between words, scripto continuo. And is arranged in 3 columns on the page. There they are, right there. There's a stacked copy of a page. Like other early manuscripts, its text is somewhat shorter than the later manuscripts, less harmonistic in parallel passage of the Synoptic Gospels. Then came, around the same period of time, Sinaiticus. Codex Sinaiticus was discovered by Constantine Tischendorf in a convent at the foot of Mount Sinai. It contains the entire Greek Bible, plus the epistle, entire Greek Bible, plus the epistle of Barnabas, and most of the Shepherd of Hermas, early Christian writings which were widely used in teaching. It is believed to be from the 4th century, but somewhat later than Codex Vaticanus. Although Tischendorf, who found the manuscript, said that he believed that it was probably also one of the 50 copies that Eusebius had written. You say, well, Brother Baker, I thought you told us there was about 3,000 difference between those two codes. There are. Not counting the missing books. But there's about 3,000 different readings in them too. You say, why would there be 3,000 different readings and you believe that they came from the same manuscript? I would agree with Tischendorf that they probably did. Because let me ask you something. Eusebius and Pamphilus would have never been able to write 50 copies handwritten of the entire Bible by themselves. 50 copies? It took their lifetime. You know what they did? They took many scribes. And what they did is they formulated those 50 copies themselves while they were there in Caesarea to give to Constantine, if he fulfilled the order that Constantine gave him, of which he said he did. Well, if he made 50 copies of the whole Bible, that involved many people. So no wonder they would have read different, because the people that were writing them, no doubt, just made those many inscriptions wrong, or left verses out, and such as that. And that's why probably Sinaiticus differs in Vaticanus in 3,000 places, but basically manifests the 4th century reading. And the reason I believe they probably were of the same origin or thereabout. It may not be Eusebius, but they definitely come from the same common script. And if it came from the 5th column of Origen, is because they agree so much. They agree so much in some of the deviations from the Bible that is the traditional text. Prior to its publication, Tischendorf had given a descriptive account of the manuscript with a sample of his readings, and, he's just talking about it as far as his readings of how he gave it. The text of Sinaiticus is written in 4 columns. Notice this one's written in 4 columns, not 3 like Vaticanus. Contains an unusually high number of readings, which have clearly arisen by transcriptural error. All right, now this is what this means. This is supposed to be, according to Tischendorf, it's supposed to be the most accurate reading of the New Testament in the original. But the proof of this, that this is a corrupt Bible, is this. If you you've got the Sinaiticus manuscript. This is only one page. But if you'll notice these markings in the center column, you see those? Okay. You see these markings on the pages here? See these markings? Okay. If you go and open up Sinaiticus, you'll find from 8 to 10 different scribes crossing out words, writing words in the column, writing them above words, and correcting this text all through the Scriptures. As many as 8 to 10 scribes corrected this writing over the centuries to show the fact that nobody accepted that as a pure text, because 8 to 10 different people corrected it on as many occasions. So why would you think this ought to be the text of the New Testament? Why would you accept that text in the Old Testament if you got that many people correcting it? The manuscript was first published by Tischendorf in 1863, 1865, and late 1911. Full collations are presented by Scribner in 1864, and Prebendary Scribner of England, he collated the whole manuscript. You know what Scribner said after he collated the manuscript? And when I say collated, this is what I mean. Here's what they did. This is what Prebendary Scribner, Heuschker, and Dean Bergen did with Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. They took the two manuscripts along with Alexandrinus, and they compared every word of every verse throughout the whole New Testament, and collated them with one another. They collated them and then read them with one another against each other, and found out this right here, that Vaticanus differs with Sinaiticus in over 3,000 different places. Not only do they differ between each other in 3,000 places, but they differ one with another against Alexandrinus in over 5,800 places. You know what Scribner said? Scribner said that Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, after he collated those two manuscripts, every word of both texts, y'all. Listen, if you want a copy of the collation, you can buy a book from Bible for Today, Liz's granddaddy. Get the address from Liz, her granddad. And for Bible for Today, I'll tell you what, the Dean Bergen Society has a copy of the whole collation of Vaticanus Sinaiticus by Heuschker. You know what Scribner said after it? He said, these three manuscripts, especially Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, are the two most corrupt manuscripts just by the internal evidence that are on the face of this earth. They not only don't agree with the other manuscripts that we have, they don't even agree with themselves. And yet, you know what scholarship says? Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, when you get to Sinaiticus, you know what that is? That's an alphabet. That's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Watch this. We go back to the original. Watch this right here. Here's Vaticanus. You know what Vaticanus is? It's B. Aleph, B. You know what they did? They gave them the precedence all over all the other manuscripts. You said, who did that? Griesbach. A man by the name of Griesbach, a scholar. You say, how does he have anything to do it? You know what Griesbach said? Griesbach said this right here, that as far as Vaticanus and Sinaiticus and Alexandrinus was concerned, Alexandrinus has an A. Alexandrinus is A, Vaticanus is B, and Sinaiticus is A of the Hebrew alphabet. They wouldn't even make it C. Why? To give it precedence. You know why? Because they themselves despise the Textus Receptus. And they intended to undermine it and unseat it as the authority of the reading. Even though the Bible we've got that authorized version you got in your lap bears witness It bears witness to over 95% of all the readings that we found as far as extant manuscripts on this planet right now. And there's over 6,800 pieces of the Bible that date all the way back to 150 AD. There's more attestation to the Scriptures as far as the Bible is concerned than any other book or any other writing in existence of mankind. And nearly all the witnesses we have bear witness to what you got in a King James Bible. Don't you tell me the devil doesn't have an advocate. Don't you tell me the devil hasn't got his ministers. He's a liar and a follower of it. From Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, the next one was Jerome's Latin Vulgate. Let's see. I better go back up to my bad tree, hadn't I? You got to get that little hand. I'm not real perfect at this yet. But I'm glad to make my church. Jerome's translation. Jerome did not embark on the work with the intention of creating a new version of the whole Bible, but the changing nature of his program can be tracked in his voluminous correspondence. Although Jerome himself is not altogether a reliable witness, he has been commissioned by Pope Damascus in 382 to revise the Old Latin. Notice, he was sent there purposely to revise the Old Latin. You know what the Old Latin is? The Old Latin came, if anything, it came from some of the original writings. Why, the first translation that would have come out of the Greek would be the Old Latin, y'all. Jerome revised the Old Latin text. Well, then evidently there was a text there to revise. Right. But let me ask you something. 382, right? He revised the Old Latin. What would be the date of that one? If 382 is when he went to revise that one, how old was that one? You reckon it's older than Vaticanus and Sinaiticus 350 AD? Yeah. Don't you know that this one is older than Vaticanus and Sinaiticus? But you know what? When you give precedence to Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, you just don't count that one anymore. You say, do we have any witnesses of the Old Latin, Brother Baker? Absolutely. We've got the text of the Old Latin. You say, where's it found? In the Waldensian text. The Reformers had it. You say, what did they do? They rejected Vaticanus and Sinaiticus and took the Old Latin in precedence. Because why? Because the Old Latin had also the Gothic. It had the Old Syrian. It had the witnesses through antiquity to bear witness, this right here, that this was a purer text than the one that was revised by Jerome. He was sent in 382 to revise the Old Latin text of the four Gospels from the best Greek text. All right, here we go. That's why in your Bible, sometimes you'll read in the center, older and better manuscripts. By the time of Damascus' death in 384, he had thoroughly completed his task, together with a more cursory revision from what? Where did he say he got it from, y'all? Greek Septuagint. Where did he get a Greek Septuagint of the Old Latin? A Greek Septuagint. Look at this, y'all. Look what he says right here. And they say things and don't even realize they say what they say. They don't realize that when they say things, some of us who think will actually think. He said he completed his task together with a more cursory revision from the Greek Septuagint of the Old Latin text of the Psalms. The Greek Septuagint of the Old Latin text? Evidently, he's telling you right here that Origen, the Greek Septuagint, that Origen used an Old Latin text of the Psalms. How much the rest of the New Testament he then revised is difficult to judge today. I know it is. But if you pick up a new Bible, you can find most of it. But if so, little of his work survived in the Vulgate text. In 385, Jerome was forced out of Rome and eventually settled in Bethlehem, where he produced a new version of the Psalms translated from the what? Hexaplar Greek text. Guess what? A new what? A new version of the Psalms. He also appears to have undertaken further new translation of other Septuagint books into Latin. But again, these are not found in the Vulgate text. But from 390 to 405, Jerome switched to translating directly from the Hebrew and retranslated anew all 39 books in the Hebrew Bible, including a further third version of the Psalms, which survives in very few Vulgate manuscripts. In his prologues, Jerome described those books or portions of those books in the Septuagint, which were not found in the Hebrew. Notice, he's saying that the Septuagint had books that were not found in the Hebrew. If that's right, then the Septuagint is not an accurate rendition of an old Hebrew text. It can't be, because an old Hebrew text didn't have those books in it. Nevertheless, the Septuagint. Notice how that they're calling Origen's fifth column now the Septuagint every time you see it. If you repeat a lie enough, people will begin to believe it. It remained the standard of the Old Testament Greek-speaking Christians, and the counterpart Old Testament of the Vulgate would finally have similar content of the Old Testament text outside the Hebrew canon. Jerome translated Tobit and Judith anew from the Aramaic, but from the Greek only the additions to Esther from the Septuagint and the additions to Daniel from Theodotion. Look at this. They admit the fact right here that as far as Jerome's text is concerned, it did come from the Hexapla because of this right here. They say that he must have translated his Greek of Esther from the Septuagint. Additions to Daniel, they said, he got from Theodotion. Don't you remember, he's in the, I think Theodotion is in the sixth column. The others, Baruch, Wisdom, Ecclesiasticus, Maccabees, and fourth Esdras, and the Prayer of Manasses remain in the Vulgate manuscripts. They're old Latin renderings. Their style can still be markedly distinguished from Jerome's. The Vulgate text, Jerome's translations from the Greek of the additions to Esther and Daniel, are recombined with his separate translations of these books from the Hebrew. So we got Jerome's Latin Vulgate. Then comes the Alexandrian. You say, Brother Baker, what are you trying to show? I'm trying to show you the fruit of this tree. The fruit of this tree is in the new translations. And there's another tree that our translation comes from. This tree gave us Alexandria, which is by Griesbach given the connotation of A. Codex Alexandrinus received its name from the circumstance that its earliest known location was the Egyptian city of Alexandria. It is believed to be from the 5th century. The text is written in capitals called uncial script and arranged in 2 columns on the page. It contains the entire Greek Bible minus Matthew 1:1 through look at it. It contains the entire Greek Bible minus Matthew 1:1 through 25:6.
Short book.
Well, that's a short rendition of Matthew. Why doesn't it say contains most of the Greek Bible? Look at that word. It contains the entire Greek Bible, minus Matthew 1:1 through 25:6, John 6:50 through John 8:52, and 2 Corinthians 4:13 through 12:16. That's a lot to be the entire Bible. And notice this right here, John 6:50 through 8:52. Maybe that's why when we read John 8:1 concerning the woman taken in adultery, they say the best manuscripts omit these passages. So when they tell you the best manuscripts, they're talking about Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, Alexandrinus. Every time you read the best manuscripts, if in any Bible you get, if you read in your center column, the best manuscripts omit, or the best manuscripts say, I'll tell you what I'll do. And I'm not a betting man, but I'll tell you this right here. I'll assure you that you can't find me one reference that says that's not making a reference to Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, and Alexandrinus. At the end are added some early Christian writings. What's that called, y'all? What are early Christian writings? Commonly used in teaching. Like the first epistle of Clement and the second epistle of Clement. What would those be referred to as? They just seem like they hate the word apocryphal. Because it means hidden. Codex was sent as a gift to, guess who it was sent to, y'all?
King James.
The same one who commissioned King James Version. Well, I wonder why they just didn't use that. Well, it came a little later, it did. 1627. But it was found before that. They could have used it. There are the characteristics history of the Alexandrian text. Among the Christian scribes at Alexandria, developments took another turn. According to Streeter, the learned Christians followed the tradition of what? There it is. Alexandrian, classical, that's why it's written in that block form, y'all. Classical scholarship, which was always to prefer the shortest readings in the places in which the manuscripts differed. Let me tell you something. When you open up one of the new Bibles, it's only natural that they've taken away from the verses. You know why? Because these manuscripts do that, y'all. If it follows the Alexandrian text, it takes away. They add or take away. If you get into the Vatican text and the Sinaiticus text, you'll find that some of them expand it. The Alexandrians were always ready to suspect and reject New Testament readings which seemed to them to present difficulties, according to Dean Bergen. In his commentary, Origin, the leading, okay, we already saw that. I'm not going to go on that. Let's go back to the Alexandrian text from 450 and the text of Ephraim. Let me get up here. I got to get that little hand, don't I? Whoop. Now there we go. Getting better all the time. Ephraemi Rescriptus. Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus. Says it's a 5th century Greek manuscript of the Bible, the last of the group of the 4 great uncial manuscripts of the Greek Bible. Notice. Of the 4 great uncial manuscripts of the Greek Bible. When you read these periodicals and stuff, and of course, all I'm doing is I'm telling you, when we type these things out, and we got these things from the International Bible Encyclopedia as well as the other sources and everything, I typed them out just like they read them. I didn't edit them or anything else. I typed just what the scholars have to say. Notice how the scholars, when they talk about Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, and Alexandrinus, and Ephraemi Scriptus, when they talk about these texts, they're always the greatest. You'll never hear them refer to the Syrian text as the greatest. Every time they talk about the Syrian or the old Latin text of the Italian, such as that, you know, they never boast about those things when the scholars write an article. They're always an inferior text. It receives its name as a codex in which treatises of Ephraim, the Syrian, and Greek translations were written over Rescriptus, a former text that had been washed off its vellum pages, thus forming a pamphlet. The later text was produced in the 12th century. Let's see. Watch this. The effacement of the original text was incomplete. Fortunately, for beneath the text of Ephraim are the remains of what was once a complete Bible. This text here, notice, it's hard to read it, isn't it? You know why? Because the text of the Bible is underneath. Somebody wrote over it. Writing material was very precious in those days. But you can tell how much they really liked that book. You know why? They wrote over the top of it. They must have really venerated it. What remains is what was once a complete Bible, containing both the Old Testament and the New. It forms one of the codices for textual criticism on which higher criticism is based. No wonder they put it fourth in line. Look at that. Higher criticism is based. You know what that is? Denying the historical accuracy of the Old Testament as far as it being a truth. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, the Codex was brought to Florence by an immigrant scholar, and Medici brought it to France as part of her dowry, and from the Bourbon Royal Library it came to rest at National de France, Paris. All right, let's see. Tischendorf is the one who he made his reputation an international one when he published the Greek New Testament text in 1843, and the Old Testament in 1845. The torn condition of many of the folios of pages and all, the ghostly traces of text overlaid by the latter, and such as that. The reason I say this slide was this right here. I wanted you to notice something. That when Constantine von Tischendorf, he made his reputation an international one when he published the Greek New Testament text in 1843. Every time Tischendorf found a Greek text, and he would keep it in his own private secrecy, and I'm not saying I blame him because he found the text and he would begin to read it. What he did is he took the text and got the readings from the text the best he could. But every time he would publish it, he would say that text right there was the best rendition of the New Testament in the Greek. Every time he found one. When he found Sinaiticus, it was almost a scandal. Because here, for all this time, until he found Sinaiticus, he had boasted about all these readings and all the so-called manuscripts that he had translated and found as he went through all of Europe and Africa and everywhere else to find, and Egypt and all, and over in Caesarea and all, trying to find as much as papyrus and all that he could as readings. He would publish a New Testament. When he finally found Sinaiticus in the 1800s, he scrapped everything he said about all the rest of them. He just scrapped them all and made 8,000 changes to the New Testament with Sinaiticus and talked about this being the original. It'd be like me defending the King James Bible and tomorrow I found a manuscript and just trashed everything and just wrote me a new one. Then comes Wycliffe, 1382. Now some would say, Brother Baker, why you got Wycliffe's translation on the bad tree? I'll tell you why. Because Wycliffe's translation, although it's the first English Bible, Wycliffe translates his first English Bible from the Latin Vulgate. And there's a copy of a page of it there. The New Testament was first finished about the year 1380, and in 1382 or soon afterwards, the version of the entire Bible was completed. Wycliffe was referred to as the morning star of the Reformation. That's what he's referred to. But the reason that the Catholic Church dug his bones up and burned him afterwards after he died and all was this right here, is because he gave the Bible, he gave the Vulgate to the common people. The Catholic Church hated their own people in so much if they tried to get the common people to read the Scriptures. They were afraid of the Bible all along. And even though Wycliffe, as a priest, even though he was had allegiance to the Catholic Church until he started reading the Scriptures and printed the Scripture in the vernacular. He had a group of followers after him called the Lollards. And what he did is he tried to teach the common man the Bible. That was his only mistake. And in so doing, he translated the Latin Vulgate into English for the common people to be able to read it. And in so doing, what he did is he offended the papacy because they thought that only the priest, just like in the Old Testament, only the priest should have the Bible. And not only that, but they should have it in a language that only they could interpret. They wanted Jerome's Bible and the Bible to stay in Latin. You've got to remember something. Not until the 1600s did the Catholic Church. In 1610, when they came out to Douay Rheims, that's when they came up with a complete Bible in English. And it had to be from Jerome's Latin Vulgate. Then from there came the Douay. Douay Bible, preparation of an English translation of the Bible appropriate for the Roman Catholic consumption, began in Douay during the reign of Queen Elizabeth. There's a group of English scholars and exiles translated directly from the Vulgate into English, including often controversial notes. Political disruption in Douay led the translation team to flee Reims. There they completed the New Testament in 1582. Both financial hardships and the 1592 arrival of the Clementine version of the Vulgate, slow translation and production of the Old Testament, the translation team returned to Douay in 1593. Their translation is sometimes slavishly loyal to the language of the Vulgate, creating Latinisms, which render the passage nearly what? Incomprehensible. They got to keep that language barrier. The entire English Douay-Rheims Bible appeared in 1635. This Bible provided the foundation for the standard version for English-speaking what? Catholics until the last century. It's the Douay-Rheims that translated in English and says just like it said in the Latin Vulgate. When John the Baptist came out of that wilderness and preaching, he didn't say repent for the kingdom of heaven is hand. He said do penance. When the angel Gabriel meets Mary, he's hailing her full of grace. Douay-Rheims, Clementine Vulgate. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on all of these because all they are is renditions from, let me get back up my bad tree here. The Clementine Vulgate here in 1592 is nothing but the Vulgate again. Then comes those individuals after this period of time of 1592 begins the Reformation. But I'm going to stop here. And the reason I am is because in this period of time, the 1800s, in the 1800s, we passed the Reformation now, and I don't want to go any further than that, and we come into higher scholarship and what we call the critics, the period of the critics, where the higher criticism that began in the secular world is now affecting the church as far as in criticism, in lower criticism and higher criticism marrying itself by now trying to undermine the Textus Receptus and the text that the King James Bible came from. So I got to stop here on our bad tree on purpose. And what I want to do is I want to go and we want to get to the fact of the good tree and realize where it comes from. Where am I at right now? I got just a few minutes here, and let me come into this right here, where we come into the foundation of the King James Bible. What's its Old Testament? Notice this right here. You don't find the names of any scholar as far as a philosopher is concerned. These are all translations of the Bible. And all of them are in the vernacular. The only book that has to do with anything of tradition is this one. Philosophers are not associated with these books. These are nothing but transcripts and transitions of the Bible into other languages that are going from church to church to church. Like a man said one time, he said the book of the Catholics has always been the book of the philosophers and scholars. He said the book of the Protestants, no one can deny, was the book of the martyrs. You know something? That's absolutely the truth. You want to follow the Bible? Then you just follow a trail of blood from the apostles to this present day. They left their testimony in the very blood of their lives to give us the Bible we've got. When did we ever burn a man for reading the Bible? They can talk about 7 witches up in Massachusetts all they want to. Tell me where that the Church of Jesus Christ was ever noted as far as the real Bible believers and the Protestants and everything. Show me where they killed people for printing the book. Why, listen, Our brethren were the ones that was trying to give the common man the book so he could get outside the chains of religion. So where do we start? We start with a Masoretic text. There's a copy of the old Masoretic text. That right there is considered influence on the development and spread of the Masoretic literature, exercised during the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries by the Franco-German school. These are eminent Jews, and he says this right here: Masoretic compilations or additions to the subject, which are all more or less frequently referred to in the marginal gloss of Bible codices and the works of Hebrew grammaticon. He says this is Jacob ben. And that's, we pronounce it Chaim. Jacob ben Chaim. Having collated a vast number of manuscripts, systemized his material and arranged the Masra in the second Bomberg edition of the Bible. Besides introducing the Masra to the margin, he compiled at the close of his Bible a concordance of the Masoretic glosses for which he could not find room in a marginal form, and added an elaborate introduction, the first treatise on the Masra ever produced. In spite of his numerous errors, speaking of the Masra, his work has been considered by some as the Textus Receptus of the Masra. You say, what is that? He's not talking about the text here. He's talking about this right here. He's talking about how the pronunciation and the words and their orders and such as that, how the Masoretes, and he put it he put it in what we call the columns and such of the thing to help you identify the words one from another as far as their pronunciation and their proper interpretation. But even though it says in numerous errors, his work has been considered some of the Textus Receptus of Masra, say this right here, that when they discuss the Masoretic text here, nobody ever messed with the text. They may have tried to give you things to help you read it, understand it, pronounce it, and such as that, but nobody messed with the words. I went back, went one too many, didn't I? All right, let's see where I'm at here. Sam told me, okay. Is used for the English translation of the Old Testament. It was used for the English translation of the Old Testament for the King James Version of the Bible. Notice, ours didn't come from Origen and his fifth column. Ours came from the Jews. What advantage then hath the Jew? Much every way, chiefly unto them were committed the oracles of God. So you know where we got our text? We got our text from here. Amen. Now you can choose and say, well, this thing got mistakes, this is this, and I don't believe this, and that, the Greek Old Testament. Go ahead. Let me tell you something, y'all. It's a free world. Choose what you want to. I'm just trying to show you our Bibles are different. You know, it's like Joshua said, choose you this day, whether the gods you served on the other side of the flood, or the gods in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. Choose it. I'll tell you this right here. Through the extensive study that I've made as far as the and even the arguments, I've read Carson, I've read Stuart Custer's works. I didn't just read everybody in favor of a King James Bible. You go to that table right there and I'll tell you what you do. And that table right there won't suffice for the books that I've got that men have written against the King James Bible. And I'll tell you what I've done. I've done my very best to read those arguments that they've had. I've read some of them. Estes Perkle wrote a big old book on the King James Bible and all the mistakes in it and everything else. I went through the whole book page by page, and you'll find it on that table there, and you'll find it collated where I've corrected all the things that he said and gave explanations of the things he said were wrong with the book. I'm just a preacher. But I'll tell you this right here. When a fellow stands around and says, oh, you King James Bible, you're a Ruckmanite. I always say something, sir, I'll tell you what I'll do. You bring your Greek New Testament. And I'll tell you what you do. You bring me your arguments and you bring your Greek New Testament and sit down at my table with me, and I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll cook the coffee and you show me the mistakes. A lot of people sit around and they talk about all the mistakes in the King James Bible. I haven't met a man yet that could sit down at any table. I've never seen a fellow write a book yet that you couldn't find not only a reasonable explanation, but I've never met one of them yet that said there were mistakes in the King James Bible that didn't have Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, and Alexandrinus in his head. said, this is not a good reading. 1 John 5:7. 1 John 5:7 ought not to be in the Bible. Oh, is that right? 1 John 5:7 shouldn't be in the Bible. Is that right? I'll tell you what you do, sir. For that fellow that says 1 John 5:7 ought not to be in the Bible, well, a fellow wrote a book. It seems like every time the devil raises up a flood against the Word of God, God raises a standard against it. Here's a book called The Debate over 1 John 5:7. You say, what is it? Oh, I don't know. It's just a book about 300 pages long. You say, what does it carry? Every reading of 1 John 5:7 back to 94 AD. You say, what do you mean? Why, do you realize this right here? The fellow wrote this book right here was a librarian for the Library of Congress. You know what he did? He went to Europe. And went to Germany and went to the libraries of all those in charge of the libraries of Europe. And you know what he did? He said, give me all the patristic readings of all the ancient readings and all the readings you got of anybody who quoted 1 John 5:7 in the writings. You know what this book is? It's a 300-page book with all the evidence that 1 John 5:7 was quoted by some of the fathers, even in the messages they preached all the way back to 150 in the Syrian period of time. Let me ask you something. Are you telling me that they didn't have it in their Bibles? Are you telling me? They say, well, it's not in any Greek. It's not in any Greek manuscript. It's not in any Greek manuscript. The only Greek manuscript is Erasmus. When he got it, he said it. He swore he'd put it in the text if he could find one Greek manuscript. You know, that's a bald-faced lie. Erasmus never said anything of the sort. You say, how do you know he didn't say anything of the sort? Well, because I got a piece of paper right here in the front of this little book right here that has a letter from the fellow that has a copy of the statement that Erasmus wrote himself about the argument of 1 John 5:7. And never did he say, if you'll find one, I'll put it in. You say, well, 1 John 5:7. Do you realize this right here? This man wrote, Stuart Custer at Bob Jones University, he wrote him a letter concerning the question about Erasmus and all that, and showed him the evidence on 1 John 5:7. You realize this? Stuart Custer never makes mention that this fellow gave him the evidence that he gave him. It's not found in the Greek manuscripts. Sir, what do we do with all the witnesses that are older than Vaticanus and Sinaiticus? What do you do with all the readings of a Syrian Bible and a Latin Bible, older than any Greek manuscript that's in existence today? What do you do with all those old readings from a Bible? Are you saying they weren't even a Bible? What about all the fathers in their messages? How about all the lectionaries where they had responsive readings in their churches? What do you do with all those quotations of the Bible that are older than your Greek manuscripts? Are you telling me we're to throw those things out as if they didn't exist in some Bible? Don't you ever think the devil doesn't have those people working for him on his side? You say, Brother Baker, these are good, godly men and stuff. I tell you, the devil has got folks on his side just like God's got folks on his side. Right. And don't you talk to me about scholarly and scholarship and everything else till you can find, until you can prove to me that these old patristic writings are false from a false book, then I got a right to believe that 1 John 5:7 ought to be there, because I got witnesses older than your witnesses that they were in there. You know what most preachers are doing? Quoting some scholar from a school. Right. I don't want you quoting no scholar from a school, sir. When you sit down at my table, I want you to bring me the evidence. Just bring it to me. You say, can you read Greek? I'll tell you what, I'll hold myself with the best of you. Just bring it on down, and I'll tell you what we'll do. If I can't read it, I'll get me an interlinear Greek, and I'll get it printed out. And if I can't print it out, I'll get me a Greek to read it for me. Just give me a little bit of time, but I'll find out whether or not you're lying or not. Don't you put away your English Bible, or you'll be accepting a Bible that comes from completely different manuscripts in the Old Testament than this Bible comes from. Because they admit their Old Testament came from Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, and an eclectic text. Our Old Testament doesn't come from an eclectic text. Our Old Testament comes from this text. Theirs is eclectic. Ours is elected. There is a little difference. All right, let's stand. Tomorrow night we'll finish up this good tree, and after when we finish up this good tree, we'll get into, I'm going to get into just a little bit of history for you on when the corruptions took place as far as the authorized version. So make sure you're on time here tomorrow night. I got to get started on time. First hour, we're going to finish up our Bibles and see where our Bible came from as far as the Old Syrians and the Old Italic. When I get into that, I want to take you up to 1881. I want to take you into 1881. By the first hour, we got to be there. Second hour, I'm going to show you that they purposely, that two men, Westcott and Hort, working with Bishop Ellicott, who was the head of the revision committee, that they purposely snuck in Westcott and Hort's Bible that they've been working on for 17 years, the New Testament, that had Vaticanus, that had the Vatican manuscript mixed with Sinaiticus to get a New Testament. They slipped it into confraternity to undermine the Greek text, which they were never told that they could do. They were told to make a revision of the King James, it's true, but it was supposed to come from the Textus Receptus. Westcott and Hort and Ellicott purposely brought in a text of the Vatican manuscript translated into the Greek. And from the Greek, they brought it into the Koine style, brought it into the commission, and you know what they did? They changed the Greek text of the Textus Receptus and replaced it with their own Greek text. You say, prove it. You come back tomorrow night, I'll prove it to you in writing. Okay? And I'll prove it by a man who himself was a contemporary of it. Okay? All right, I'm going to have a word of prayer, and it's 9 o'clock. If anybody's got any questions, I'll have to answer them. I've got to give a chance for everybody to leave. I told you I'd let you leave by around 9, and some folks got to leave and go to work and such as that. But if you have any questions, you can remain right here, ask them out loud, and I'll answer whatever questions I can give for you right now. Okay? All right, John, close us in prayer, brother.
Dear Father, thank you this time maybe to come here and learn about your word and give it to us, to learn right from wrong, and thank you, Brother Baker, being able to study this and pass it on to us, and that we may be able to use it for your glory. And I pray for that.
Amen. Amen. All right, you turn the lights on, and if anybody got a question, if you'll just ask it, I'll try to answer it right quick before we have to go. Let's get it.
Which was it? Didn't he recant back his translation?
That's what I heard. But brother, I don't have a writing on that, but I did hear that Wycliffe said that he was as far as the translation, he thought that it was a wrong translation. Yeah.
Here?
I'm not saying the won't into that. I didn't say that, but I would say there's somebody that asked me if I would answer some questions, show something, some particulars about the King James Bible. And if I did that,